They tried to strip her rank before the council, but the king declared her the only voice he trusted. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Isabella Caldwell stood in the center of the council hall, the weight of the gathered eyes pressing heavily upon her. As a high-ranking advisor in the kingdom, she had earned both admiration and disdain, but today, she could feel the palpable tension. The members of the council, who were usually divided in their opinions, had come together for one purpose: to strip her of her title and discredit her influence. There were whispers throughout the room, mutterings of betrayal and ambition, the air thick with accusations that Isabella had overstepped her bounds. But Isabella, composed and resolute, stood tall, her gaze unwavering, even as the murmurs of doubt and betrayal circled like vultures. She had served King Nathaniel Westbrook loyally for years, offering counsel when needed and guiding him through countless trials. Yet today, it seemed as though that loyalty would be questioned by the very people she had worked beside. The councilmen, eager to take advantage of a moment of vulnerability, presented their case with venom, accusing her of selfish ambitions and overreaching authority. They called for her position to be revoked, arguing that she was no longer fit to serve the king or the kingdom. Isabella, despite the sting of their words, kept her composure. She knew this was not just a personal attack, but a calculated move by those who sought to seize power for themselves. As the council members grew bolder in their demands, one voice rang out, strong, firm, and undeniably loyal. Enough! It was King Nathaniel, his presence commanding the room. All eyes shifted towards him, a mixture of surprise and respect rippling through the council. The king stepped forward, his voice clear and unwavering as he addressed the council. Isabella Caldwell is the only voice I trust, and no one will strip her of her rank. She has served this kingdom with unwavering loyalty, and I will not stand by while others seek to tear her down. Isabella's heart surged with gratitude, and for a brief moment, she felt the weight of the world lift from her shoulders. The king's declaration was more than just words. It was a shield, a promise that her position was secure. She had been on the verge of losing everything, but in that moment, she realized she was not alone. King Nathaniel had chosen her, and that choice was all she needed to stand tall once more. The council members fell silent, their disbelief palpable as King Nathaniel's words echoed in the hall. Isabella stood motionless, her heart racing. The tension in the room had shifted in an instant. What had once been a hostile gathering was now a waiting game. Would they challenge the king's decree, or would they relent? For a long moment, no one moved. Isabella felt the weight of the stares from all directions, but her gaze remained fixed on King Nathaniel, the man who had chosen her above all others. She had spent years proving her worth to the kingdom, but never had she felt so exposed, so vulnerable, as she did now. The council had been relentless, accusing her of power-hungry motives, but all of it was false. She had never sought to wield power for herself. Her loyalty had always been to the kingdom and the king. And yet, in this moment, her loyalty was being questioned, and it seemed only the king's word would save her. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, one of the council members spoke, his voice hesitant but defiant. Your Majesty, while we respect your judgment, we cannot overlook the growing concerns about Lady Caldwell's actions. She has not only overstepped her role, but endangered the very balance of power in this court. The king's gaze did not waver as he met the councilman's eyes. Enough, he said, his voice cold and final. Isabella has my trust, and that is all that matters. The councilman fell silent, his objections withered under the king's unwavering authority. Isabella's heart swelled with a mix of relief and gratitude, but she could not afford to let her emotions show. This was far from over. The battle for her place in the kingdom, and perhaps her future, was just beginning. After a long, heavy pause, King Nathaniel addressed the rest of the council. If there are no further objections, then we are done here. He turned to Isabella, offering a small, reassuring nod. For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of something deeper in his eyes, but it was gone before she could read it fully. The council was dismissed, and the room began to empty, the tension slowly fading. Isabella remained standing for a moment longer, her mind racing as she processed what had just happened. She had been on the brink of losing everything: her rank, her influence, her future. But now, thanks to the king, she had been given a second chance. But what did that second chance mean? What would she do now, knowing that her position had been so fragile? Isabella couldn't afford to be naive. She knew the council's discontent had not disappeared. They would find new ways to challenge her, to test her loyalty and her strength. And even with the king's support, she knew her path would be fraught with danger. Yet, for the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in ages: hope. She would fight to hold on to her place in the kingdom. She would prove that the king had made the right choice in trusting her. But to do so, she would have to face more challenges than she had ever imagined, and the stakes had never been higher. The days that followed in the council hall were filled with uncertainty. Isabella had been granted a reprieve, but she knew that her position was still precarious. The council members, though temporarily silenced by the king's intervention, were not the type to give up so easily. Their eyes were still on her, waiting for the first misstep to pounce. Yet, the king's unwavering support had emboldened her. For the first time in weeks, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was not merely surviving. She was being given the chance to prove herself again. The halls of the castle were quiet as Isabella walked through them, her thoughts swirling with strategy. The king had chosen her, and she would not disappoint him. But she knew she had to be cautious. The political landscape in the kingdom was fragile, and any sign of weakness would be exploited. Isabella had seen this before. Power could slip away in an instant, and once lost, it was almost impossible to regain. She made her way to the king's study, where he often retreated to think and strategize. She had requested a private audience, and he had agreed without hesitation. As she entered, she found him standing by the large window, looking out over the kingdom below. He turned when he heard the door open, his expression unreadable. "Lady Caldwell," he said, his voice calm but steady. "I trust you are well." Isabella nodded, walking toward the desk where he sat her day. "I am, Your Majesty. But I come to you not for comfort, but for counsel." The king raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on," he said, motioning for her to sit. Isabella took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts before speaking. "The council is not done with me, Your Majesty. They may have been silenced for now, but their ambition will not simply fade. I need your guidance on how to proceed." The king's eyes softened, but there was a hint of something else, something deeper, beneath his calm exterior. "I understand. You have done well so far, Isabella. But you must be patient. The council's challenge was never about you personally. It was about power. They see you as a threat to their own ambitions. But you have one thing they do not: my trust." Isabella met his gaze, her heart swelling with gratitude. The king's words were more than just reassurance. They were a promise. She could feel the weight of that promise, and it gave her strength. "I will not let you down, Your Majesty," she said, her voice steady. The king gave a small nod, as if satisfied. "I know you won't. But you must be cautious. There are others in the kingdom who are watching, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Do not underestimate the danger that comes with your position." Isabella nodded, understanding the gravity of his warning. She had always known that power was fleeting, but now she saw just how fragile it could be. She could not afford to make any mistakes. The stakes had never been higher. As she left the study, the weight of her responsibility settled upon her once more. She had the king's trust, but she knew that alone would not be enough to protect her. She had to prove herself, not just to the council, but to everyone who would ever question her ability to lead. And the journey ahead would not be an easy one. Days passed in a haze of preparations and cautious steps. Isabella had returned to her duties, but she could feel the eyes of the council on her at all times. They were waiting for her to make a mistake, to show weakness. But the king's words echoed in her mind, fueling her resolve. She would not falter. She could not afford to. As she walked through the castle corridors, her thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice. "Lady Caldwell, may I have a word?" It was Marcus, one of her trusted aides, his face drawn with concern. Isabella stopped and turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Of course, Marcus. What is it?" Marcus glanced around to ensure no one was nearby, then leaned in closer. There are rumors, my lady. Whispers in the shadows. Some of the councilmen are speaking of a plan, something that could undermine your position again. Isabella's stomach tightened, but she maintained her composure. What are they planning? She asked quietly. Marcus hesitated before answering, his voice low. They are not certain yet, but there are talks of undermining your influence with the king. They believe if they can turn his advisors against you, they may have a chance to sway his opinion. It is dangerous, my lady. Very dangerous. Isabella's mind raced as she processed this information. She had known her enemies were still watching, waiting for a moment to strike. But this was a direct challenge to the king's trust in her. If they succeeded, it wouldn't just be her position on the line. It could cost her everything. Thank you for the warning, Marcus, she said, her voice calm, though her heart was pounding in her chest. Keep your eyes open. Report back to me if you hear anything more. Marcus nodded, his expression grave. I will, my lady. But be careful. The stakes are higher now than ever. As he left, Isabella stood there, her thoughts a whirlwind. She had known the council would not let her remain in power easily, but this? They were trying to manipulate the very foundation of her relationship with the king. She could not allow that. She would not allow that. The weight of the situation pressed heavily upon her, but she had never been one to back down. She had survived countless challenges, and this would be no different. She needed to act swiftly. If the council succeeded in planting seeds of doubt in the king's mind, her position could unravel in an instant. She would have to find a way to prove her loyalty to him, to remind him why he had trusted her in the first place. But how? As she pondered her next move, Isabella was interrupted once again, this time by the king's voice calling her name from the hallway. She turned to see King Nathaniel approaching, his presence commanding, as always. He gave her a nod, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of concern, perhaps. Lady Caldwell, I need to speak with you, he said, his tone serious. Isabella's heart skipped a beat. Was this the moment she had feared? Would he begin to doubt her? But she masked her anxiety with a smile and nodded. Of course, Your Majesty. What is it? The king motioned for her to follow him to a nearby chamber, away from prying eyes. As they entered, he closed the door behind them. I've heard the rumors, he said simply. Isabella's heart sank, but she quickly composed herself. What rumors, Your Majesty? She asked, trying to sound composed. The king looked at her carefully before speaking again. The whispers about you, about your loyalty, about your intentions. The council is sowing doubt, Isabella. I need to know where you stand. Isabella's mind raced. She had expected this, but the reality of it was still jarring. This was the test she had been dreading. The moment where the king's faith in her would be put to the ultimate trial. But she stood tall, meeting his gaze with unwavering conviction. Your Majesty, she said, her voice steady and clear. My loyalty has always been to you and to the kingdom. I would never betray your trust. I know there are those who seek to use lies to turn you against me, but I will not let them succeed. You have my word. I will do everything in my power to protect this kingdom and your reign. There was a long pause as the king studied her, his eyes searching for any sign of doubt. After what felt like an eternity, he nodded, his expression softening. I believe you, Isabella. But be cautious. They will not stop. You must be vigilant. Isabella's heart swelled with gratitude. He had not only believed her, he had reaffirmed his trust in her. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. She knew the path ahead would not be easy, but with the king's trust still intact, she had a fighting chance. She would not let anyone tear down what she had worked so hard to build. Isabella's life in the castle had become a delicate balancing act. Every move she made, every word she spoke was scrutinized by those who had once been her allies. The whispers of doubt continued to ripple through the halls, but she was no longer afraid of them. The king's trust still burned strong in her heart, a beacon of hope amidst the growing storm of political intrigue. But the stakes had never been higher, and she knew that the time had come to make her move. One afternoon, as Isabella sat in her chamber, reviewing the latest reports from the kingdom's border regions, a knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She stood, smoothing her gown before answering. Standing in the doorway was Marcus, his face drawn and serious. My lady, the king requests your presence in the council chambers, he said, his voice low. Isabella's heart skipped a beat. This was it. the moment she had been preparing for. Without a word, she nodded, gathering her thoughts and composure as she followed him through the winding corridors of the castle. As they approached the council chambers, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling of tension that hung in the air. The door opened, and she stepped inside to find King Nathaniel standing at the head of the room, surrounded by the council members. Their eyes were fixed on her as she entered, and she could feel the weight of their judgment. "Lady Caldwell." The king greeted her, his voice warm but firm. "Please, take your seat." Isabella nodded and moved to the table, taking her place beside the king. She knew that today would be different. Today, she would have to confront her enemies head-on. The council members exchanged uneasy glances, clearly sensing that something was about to change. The king spoke first, his voice cutting through the tension. "We have gathered here today to address the rumors that have been circulating about Lady Caldwell," he said, his gaze sweeping across the room. "There are those who believe that she has betrayed my trust, that she has acted against the best interests of this kingdom. I am here to set the record straight." The room was silent as the king's words hung in the air. Isabella held her breath, waiting for what would come next. "I have known Lady Caldwell for many years," the king continued, his voice unwavering. "She has always been loyal to me and to the kingdom. I have no doubt that she has the best interests of this realm at heart. Any claims to the contrary are nothing more than baseless gossip and deceit." The council members exchanged more glances, some of them clearly uncomfortable, but none dared to speak out against the king. Isabella felt a surge of gratitude towards him. His faith in her had never wavered, and now, in front of all of them, he was publicly declaring it. "Lady Caldwell," the king said, turning his gaze to her, "I stand by you. I trust you." Isabella's heart swelled with emotion, but she kept her expression composed. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment where the king's support would shield her from the council's attacks. But she knew this was just the beginning. The council would not let her off so easily. She had to prove herself, not just to the king, but to everyone in the room. "Thank you, Your Majesty," Isabella said, her voice steady. "I will not let you down." The king nodded, then turned back to the council. "You have heard my decision. Lady Caldwell will remain in her position. Any further attempts to undermine her will be seen as an attack on the crown, and I will not tolerate it." There was a heavy silence as the council members processed the king's words. The tension in the room was thick, but there was no immediate opposition. Isabella knew that the battle was far from over. The council would continue to scheme, but she had a powerful ally in the king. As the meeting concluded, Isabella rose from her seat, her thoughts already racing ahead. She had to find a way to solidify her position further, to ensure that no one could ever question her loyalty again. She could not afford to let her guard down, not even for a moment. As she left the council chambers, she was acutely aware of the eyes that followed her. But now, she walked with a sense of purpose. The path ahead would be challenging, but with the king's trust by her side, Isabella knew that she could face whatever came next. The following weeks were filled with a quiet determination for Isabella. Though she had secured the king's support, the council was still a looming presence, watching her every move. The whispers in the halls hadn't stopped. If anything, they had grown louder. But Isabella refused to let fear dictate her actions. She knew that her survival depended not just on the king's protection, but on her own strength and strategy. One evening, as she stood at the balcony of her chambers overlooking the vast, sprawling castle grounds, she saw the familiar figure of King Nathaniel walking along the garden path, his deep-set eyes scanning the horizon as if lost in thought. The moonlight reflected off the smooth stones beneath his feet, casting long shadows that seemed to mirror the heavy thoughts in his mind. Isabella had not spoken with him in days, the silence between them filled with the unspoken weight of the political turmoil surrounding them. She had a choice now: wait for the next move or take the initiative. She made up her mind. Leaving her chambers, she made her way to the gardens. The night air was cool, and her footsteps were muffled against the stone pathways. As she approached the king, he turned, surprised but not displeased to see her. "Lady Caldwell," he greeted her, his tone warm but guarded. "I didn't expect you to be out here so late." Isabella smiled softly, her nerves hidden beneath a mask of calm. "I couldn't sleep, and I thought perhaps I might join you for a moment of solitude." The king nodded, gesturing toward the stone bench under the nearby oak tree. I could use some company, he said, his voice betraying a hint of weariness. Isabella sat beside him, her posture graceful but confident. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The soft rustle of leaves in the breeze filled the silence between them. Isabella could sense the burden the king carried, the weight of the decisions he had made and the ones still to come. Finally, the king broke the silence. You've been quiet these past days, Isabella. Are you truly all right? His eyes searched hers, looking for something she wasn't sure she was ready to share. Your Majesty, Isabella began slowly, her voice steady. I am well, but I am not naive. I know the council will continue to challenge me, and though I have your trust, there are many who see me as a threat to their own ambitions. I must act. The king looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. What do you propose? Isabella met his gaze, her expression resolute. I propose that we act first. If we sit back and wait for the council to make their next move, it will be too late. I need your full support, not just as a king, but as an ally in this battle. Together, we can outmaneuver them. The king was silent for a moment, clearly considering her words. You know I stand by you, he said finally, his voice firm but filled with caution. But you must be careful. The council is not the only force at play here. There are factions within the kingdom that will exploit any sign of weakness. If you move too soon, you risk exposing yourself to those who would use you as a pawn in their game. Isabella nodded, understanding the gravity of his warning. I won't move recklessly, she assured him. But I cannot afford to wait. The longer I do, the more time they have to undermine me. We need to strike at the heart of their plan before they can strike at mine. The king regarded her thoughtfully for a moment longer, then slowly nodded. Very well. I will support you, Isabella. But know this. Once we begin this, there will be no turning back. The council will see it as an open challenge to their authority. It won't be easy. Isabella's heart swelled with gratitude, but she kept her expression calm. I understand, Your Majesty, and I am ready. I will do whatever it takes to secure my place in this kingdom and to ensure that we both remain in power. The king gave a small smile, though there was still a touch of uncertainty in his eyes. You are a determined woman, Isabella. I admire that. She smiled back, feeling the weight of the moment. The path ahead would be dangerous, but she was no longer afraid. With the king by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. Together, they would take the fight to the council. And this time, Isabella would not be the one on the defensive. She would be the one who took control of her fate. The days following their conversation in the gardens were filled with quiet preparations. Isabella worked tirelessly, her every action deliberate and calculated. She knew that the council's opposition would only grow more intense, and the king's support, while invaluable, would not shield her forever. She had to take matters into her own hands. The king had agreed to her plan, but his warning still echoed in her mind. There was no turning back once they made their move, and she was prepared for the consequences. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Isabella stood in the council chambers, the room now dimly lit by the soft glow of torches. The council had been summoned for an emergency session, and she knew that this was the moment. The king had given her his word, but she would need to stand on her own. The council members filed in one by one, their faces betraying little emotion, though Isabella could feel the weight of their eyes upon her. She took her place beside the king, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering. King Nathaniel had arrived just moments before, and he sat at the head of the table, his presence commanding, as always. He gave Isabella a brief but reassuring glance, though she could see the same tension in his shoulders that she felt in her own. The room settled into silence as the council leader, a tall man with a sharp gaze named Lord Ainsley, called the meeting to order. We are gathered here today to discuss the ongoing issues within the kingdom, Lord Ainsley began, his voice cold and authoritative. As you all know, there have been troubling rumors regarding Lady Caldwell's actions, and it is time we address them once and for all. The words hit Isabella like a wave. She had expected this, of course, but hearing them spoken aloud in the council chamber brought the full weight of her situation crashing down on her. Lord Ainsley's eyes turned toward her, his gaze piercing. Lady Caldwell, he continued, his voice laced with accusation, we have heard your defense, but the whispers continue to spread. It is clear that your influence has become a threat to the stability of this council and, by extension, the kingdom. The council members murmured in agreement, and Isabella's heart began to race. This was the challenge she had been anticipating, the moment where she would have to prove her loyalty, her strength, and her unwavering commitment to the kingdom. The king's voice cut through the tension in the room. "Enough, Lord Ainsley," he said, his tone firm but calm. "Lady Caldwell has served this kingdom with loyalty and dedication. She has proven her worth time and time again. Any accusations against her are baseless and will not be entertained in this court." A hush fell over the room at the king's words, but Lord Ainsley was not easily deterred. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice rising, "with all due respect, these accusations cannot be dismissed so easily. The council demands answers. The people demand answers. This kingdom cannot afford instability at its highest levels." Isabella could feel the tension escalating, but she remained calm. This was her moment. The king had made his stand, and now it was time for her to do the same. She turned to face the council, her voice steady but filled with authority. "I stand before you today as a servant of this kingdom, just as I have always been. My loyalty lies with the crown, with the king, and with the people. I have worked tirelessly to protect this kingdom, and I will continue to do so, regardless of the whispers that seek to tear me down." Her words rang out in the silent room, and she could see the council members exchanging uneasy glances. "If there are those among you who believe I am a threat," she continued, "then I will prove to you that I am no such thing. I will not back down. I will not allow the stability of this kingdom to be threatened by unfounded accusations." The king's gaze was unwavering as he looked at Isabella, his trust in her evident. "I stand with Lady Caldwell," he said, his voice strong. "The matter is settled. Let it be known that any further attempts to undermine her will be viewed as an attack on the crown itself." The room was still, the council members frozen in place. It was clear that they had not anticipated such a direct challenge, and they were unsure how to respond. But Isabella knew that this was just the beginning. She had made her statement, and now she would wait. The council would not relent easily, and she would have to fight for every inch of her position. But for the first time in a long while, Isabella felt a sense of control. The battle had only just begun, but she was no longer afraid. In the days that followed the council meeting, Isabella could feel the tension in the air, thicker than ever. The battle lines were drawn, and she knew that nothing would be the same from now on. The council had reluctantly accepted the king's decision, but their anger simmered just beneath the surface. They would be watching her every move, waiting for her to slip. But Isabella was resolute. She had made her stand, and she would not back down. She spent her days in quiet strategy, gathering information, observing the council members, and quietly strengthening her alliances. She knew that her position was still fragile, but she also knew that she had something none of her enemies possessed, a powerful, unwavering ally in the king. One evening, as Isabella reviewed the latest reports in her chambers, she was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. She looked up to see Marcus, her trusted aide, standing in the doorway, a look of urgency in his eyes. "My lady, there's something you need to see," he said, his voice low. Isabella stood immediately, her curiosity piqued. "What is it, Marcus?" Marcus stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "It's Lord Ainsley," he said, his voice tight. "He's been meeting with several of the other council members in secret. I don't know what they're planning, but it can't be good. They're plotting against you, Lady Caldwell." Isabella's heart skipped a beat. She had known that the council would continue to scheme, but the idea of a secret meeting sent a chill down her spine. "Do you know what they're planning?" she asked, her voice steady, though her mind raced. "Not yet," Marcus replied, "but I've been working on finding out. I'll get more information as soon as I can. Guard again." "Thank you, Marcus," she said, her voice calm. "Keep watching, and make sure you get me that information as soon as you can." As Marcus left, Isabella stood there for a long moment, the weight of her situation settling heavily on her shoulders. She could feel the walls closing in around her. But she wasn't afraid. She had faced challenges before, and this would be no different. She would take the fight to them, just as she had with the council. She would expose their plots and turn the tide in her favor. That night, as Isabella lay in bed, she could not shake the feeling that everything was moving faster than she had anticipated. The king had trusted her, but trust alone would not be enough to secure her future. She had to be smart. She had to outmaneuver the council before they could strike first. The next morning, Isabella woke with a renewed sense of purpose. She had spent the night thinking about her next move, and now she was ready to act. She made her way to the king's chambers, her heart steady with determination. When she entered, the king was sitting at his desk, his brow furrowed as he worked. He looked up as she entered, and for a moment, their eyes locked. "Lady Caldwell," he said, his voice warm but serious. "What brings you here so early?" "Your Majesty," Isabella replied, her voice unwavering. "I need your full support once more. The council is planning something against me, and I can't afford to wait for them to make their move. I need to strike first." The king's expression darkened, but there was understanding in his eyes. "I see," he said, leaning back in his chair. "What do you propose?" Isabella took a deep breath before speaking, her words measured and precise. "We expose their plot before they can act. I have the information we need to discredit Lord Ainsley and the others, but I need you to stand with me, to make it clear that this betrayal will not be tolerated. If we do this right, we can turn the council against them and solidify my position once and for all." The king was silent for a moment, considering her words. Then, slowly he nodded. "Very well, Lady Caldwell. You have my support. Let us end this once and for all." Isabella felt a surge of gratitude, but she knew the road ahead would be treacherous. The council would not go down without a fight, but with the king's backing, she had a fighting chance. She would not let them take away what she had worked so hard to build. This time, she would be the one in control. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation as Isabella and the king moved swiftly to outmaneuver their enemies. Word had already begun to spread that the council was in turmoil, and Isabella knew that the time had come to make her move. The stakes were high, and she couldn't afford to be patient any longer. She spent her time gathering allies, speaking with those who had been loyal to the king, and ensuring that every detail was in place. Marcus was invaluable during this time, delivering information and coordinating efforts with precision. Together, they had begun to lay the groundwork for a decisive strike. One evening, Isabella received word that a meeting had been arranged with several of the king's most trusted advisors. She made her way to the royal meeting room, her heart steady with determination. As she entered, she saw the familiar faces of those who had remained by the king's side throughout the years. The room was quiet, the air thick with the weight of what was to come. The king stood at the center, his eyes searching her face as she entered. "Lady Caldwell," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "Are you ready to begin?" Isabella nodded. "I am, Your Majesty. The time has come." The king's advisors, each an influential figure in their own right, gathered around, their attention fully on her. Isabella could feel the pressure of the moment, but she remained composed. "The council has grown too bold," she began, her voice steady, her gaze meeting each of theirs. "It is time for us to take action. I have gathered the information we need to expose their plot, but I need your support. We must act quickly, or the opportunity will slip away." The room was still as the king's advisors exchanged looks. Isabella could see that some were hesitant, unsure of the risks they would be taking. But the king spoke first, his voice firm. "We stand with you, Lady Caldwell. We will not let the council undermine the stability of this kingdom." Isabella felt a surge of gratitude, but she also knew that this was just the beginning. With the king's support and his advisors at her side, she now had the strength to face the council head-on. It was time to expose their schemes and put an end to their attempts to weaken her. The following day, Isabella and the king's advisors gathered in the council chamber once again. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with anticipation. The council members, still recovering from the shock of the king's earlier support of Isabella, were on edge. Lord Ainsley, ever the leader of the opposition, was the first to speak. "Your Majesty, Lady Caldwell," he began, his voice cold. "We are here today to address the accusations that have been made against some of our own." Isabella stepped forward, her presence commanding. "It is not merely accusations," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "It is a plot, a conspiracy that has been carefully orchestrated by certain members of this council in an attempt to undermine the throne and destabilize the kingdom. I have the evidence to prove it." Gasps rippled through the room as Isabella produced the documents she had gathered, the key pieces of evidence that would expose the truth. The room fell into stunned silence as she laid the papers on the table, each document a testament to the council's betrayal. The king's eyes never left Isabella as she spoke, his trust in her evident. These documents, she continued, reveal secret meetings, agreements made in the shadows, and plans to divide this kingdom. It is clear that some among you have sought to use the power of this council for personal gain, and that cannot be allowed. Lord Ainsley's face paled as the weight of the documents settled in the room. He opened his mouth to protest, but the king raised his hand, silencing him. Enough, King Nathaniel said, his voice filled with authority. The evidence speaks for itself. You have betrayed the trust of this kingdom, and you will be held accountable. The council members were stunned, some unable to speak, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Isabella could see the fear in their eyes, but she knew that this moment would change everything. The king had stood by her, and now the truth had come to light. The council's power was shattered, and with it, their ability to challenge her. As the room fell silent, Isabella felt a sense of victory rising within her. She had faced her enemies, exposed their treachery, and secured her place in the kingdom once and for all. The battle was not over, but with the king's unwavering support and the evidence in hand, she knew that victory was within her reach.